Hello, I'm Dr. Larissa Tracy, and welcome to Medieval Mischief and Mayhem. I'm your host for this podcast, and for this episode, I am absolutely delighted to welcome Autumn Reinhardt-Simpson as our guest. Autumn is a PhD candidate at the University of Alberta, specializing in early modern ritual reform in England. She is currently a history lecturer at MacEwan University in Edmonton, Alberta. Autumn's dissertation argues that women's bodies were a vital battleground for liturgical reform during the English Reformations, specifically the reform of the churching rite, which was deployed to communicate the sometimes conflicting interests of church, state, and laity. Proficient in German, French, and Latin, her research encompasses medieval England and early modern religious conversion, recusancy, and church papistry. Autumn is also a contributing author to A Cultural History of Childbirth in the Early Modern Age with Bloomsbury, coming out in 2026, and the Dictionary of Virginia Biography, published with the Library of Virginia in 2010. Autumn, it is my pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us on this podcast.
Thank you so much. I'm really excited. They are English, and this is important because we were talking before about anti-Catholic kind of polemic and whatever. Catholicism starts to be associated with the foreign, right? Yes. The foreign, the effeminate, the whatever. Of course, this doesn't help when Henrietta Maria is the queen, because she's Catholic. She's very obviously.
That's James the First's queen, isn't
yes.
it? Yes.
Yeah.
So for our audience, Henrietta Maria, who is the wife of James the First. When we say James the First, that is the same King James of the King James Bible.
Yes.
When the King James Bible is not an ancient text. It is a recreation and translation of the Bible that was translated into English by William Tyndale and re-envisioned by King James in 1611.
And
his wife was
Catholic. It's another pro-English thing, right?
Very much
because
so.
If you look at the language, which everyone is like, oh, it's so wonderful and flowery. It's actually really terrible. But it basically just sort of re-enshrines being English as being godly. Yeah. In some of the translation ideas that are there. But anyway,
he uses the word dominion a lot in his translation.
Dominion.
And of course, this is also the same King James who is responsible for that first English settlement in Jamestown in 1607.
That's right.
I mean, I'm always amazed by the number of my students who do not realize that King James is not some ancient biblical king, but that he's the king of England. And there are a lot of people who don't realize that. They think that when you say King James Bible, they think you're talking about some ancient biblical king, largely because a lot of modern evangelical Americans use the King James Bible as though it is some kind of ancient religious text that predates any of our colonial machinations, and it doesn't.
Yeah, and I mean, that all comes from that idea that like Catholics were bad and wrong in every way. But we then took the Bible back. And in reality, it was a huge committee of people, all of them arguing, sometimes quite violently among each other, because King James was like, make me a Bible, make me a better Bible, right?
And there's some suggestion that Shakespeare was one of them.
Really?
Some suggestion. Oh, yes. This is a literary
thing. I've not heard of that.
Oh, yes. There is some suggestion that
Shakespeare's way better.
well, and that's the thing. I think it is because I think it's Psalm 23, something like that. There are literary scholars who try to say that there's an encoding in the numerology of one of the Psalms that suggests, because the two words that you come up with are shake and spear. And I actually think it's just possible because Shakespeare was one of James's hired poets and playwrights. So why not?
But like, when you think about it, and I'm open to being corrected, but the committee, everybody knew who the committee was. And Shakespeare would have been a very bizarre choice to be doing this among all these like supposed theologians and people. Like, I just can't. I don't know. My brain's not.
I think there's a sense that people want to, because there's so many quote questions about Shakespeare, and I actually think there are far fewer questions about Shakespeare than we like to let on. I mean, I was a fellow at the Folger Shakespeare Institute when I was in high school.
Cool.
Yeah, and I one of my side areas is Shakespeare and early modern drama, but I my area of specialty goes up until 1660. So
Yeah,
in terms of literature, but people want to ascribe this kind of secretive presence and life for Shakespeare, and because of course James was very interested in literature, and because Shakespeare's one of the king's men, because he's one of he's
right,
because James is the patron for the king's men after
right.
Chamberlain's men, after Elizabeth dies. And so it's possible in terms of just having somebody write it out. It's possible, but as you say, the committee was well known. Shakespeare was not a theologian. um
Well, and I would have thought that, like, as much as everybody was into theater and whatever, that just that mixing of like, let's have a playwright write our Bible just seems.
We like
I'm
his language.
guessing.
We like his turn of phrase. Let's have him do it.
Well, I think probably, and again, I don't know, I wasn't there, but they probably were just influenced by the
Yeah.
plays they saw or read or whatever. Like to me, that makes much more sense, but
Well,
who
and
knows?
Shakespeare's religious affiliations are somewhat
Yeah, a
questionable
little
because
different.
he was probably a recusant Catholic. There's a lot of
Yeah,
Catholicism in his plays, though there's also a lot of criticism of Catholicism. If you think about it, the friars usually fuck things up, and one should probably not
always.
ever listen to a friar, ever.
You know what? That makes sense to me, though. Not about friars, but
Yeah.
but what people when we think about this time period, this kind of goes back to what we were saying earlier about sort of how much more nuance there is. There were so many people in England that were, I don't want to say riding the fence. It wasn't that they were ambivalent, but like you could be a Catholic and call yourself a Catholic and still go to Church of England services and think this is really good. I like this.
Mhm.
And vice versa, right? People didn't necessarily pick a side early on, or even ever, I argue.
Well,
But
it would, I mean, especially if you're talking about from the dissolution of the monasteries in 1536, and you're talking about Henry's,
yes,
shall we say, conversion. I would kind of say not really. It was more
yeah,
a land grab than actual conversion because he took Catholic rites when he died. But then, of course, all of the back and forth between his children, you
yes,
can get
exactly.
whiplash in religion going back and forth between Catholic, Protestant, Catholic, Protestant. What are we today? Holy shit. Is it real? Is it the body of Christ, or is it bread?
Yeah.
What is it? Is it the body of
And
Christ? Is it
frankly,
bread? I don't know.
there were plenty of people who just didn't give a damn. They're just like, tell me where I need to be. And that's not everybody.
Right.
But I think, yes, the whiplash between monarchs is because a lot of people seem to think there's just Catholic and Protestant, but you have Henry, whose church was incredibly conservative, deeply Catholic. All he did was take away the Pope and eventually take away monastic orders and whatever.
For his own
Um,
personal gain.
yeah. And like, and
He put
I
his
always tell
name
my
on abbeys. Sorry, that was a modern political reference.
That's right. The Henry VIII Kennedy Center.
That's right. It suddenly
um,
became the Henry VIII Westminster Cathedral.
that's right. Sponsored by.
Sponsored
Um,
by, right?
yeah, like Henry's interesting because I totally agree, but I also try to inject for my students anyway a little bit of nuance in there where I'm like, if you go back to his father, who's like an absolute upstart, there's no reason he should have really had the throne, except that he just killed the guy that had the throne before him. Um,
I mean, he has a distant relation to the Plantagenets because his mother
married a servant.
married the head of her wardrobe,
That's right.
Master Tutor, and then there is a kind of a sideways tie into the Plantagenet. But yes, Henry
Yeah.
Earl of Richmond really has no actual legitimate claim to the throne
No. And
whatsoever.
I'm a huge, massive Margaret Beaufort stan, like his mom, for
Yeah,
those watching. Adore her. She does not get her due in
yeah.
fiction or movies at all. She is amazing. She's the only reason any of that happened. But you think about his father, and then of course he marries Elizabeth of York. They have kids, but to be a dynasty, you need to be a dynasty, right? You need to keep having those kids all the way down the line. So, and Henry
But
was.
I was going to say, but Henry's older brother is named Arthur. And if you're ever in line for the English throne, don't ever name your child Arthur because they will die. They will die
We know what
young.
happens to Arthur's.
Right, we do, because there can only ever be one. There can only be one King Arthur.
Oh, yeah. Well, and it's interesting.
But as you say, there
Like
has to be a
Henry,
dynasty. There has to be a dynasty.
there has to be a dynasty. And like Henry was a deeply religious man. I mean, he wrote a defense of Catholicism um, against Luther, and that's how he gets Defender of the Faith, that title from the Pope. Not that I think it was a great move. I don't know. Again, wasn't there. I'm just a rando in the year of our Lord 2026 talking about this. But, he's thinking, shit, I really need to have an heir, or this is all going to go to hell, and there's going to be war, and there's going to be this and that. And I'm not saying he was all altruistic about it. Clearly, the man was an egotist, but he's such an interesting figure. He always marries his mistresses. Well, almost all of them.
I mean, it gives new meaning to the term "lady in waiting," because of course, Anne Boleyn was one of Catherine of
Yeah.
Aragon's ladies in waiting. Jane Seymour was
Yep.
one of
Jane
Anne
Seymour,
Boleyn's ladies in
Catherine
waiting.
Howard.
Catherine Howard was most definitely one of Anne of Cleves' ladies in waiting. I think Catherine Parr was.
Catherine
The
Howard.
only one who's not is Anne of Cleves. And she
Yeah.
comes over from Germany and is like, nine, nine, nine.
She's like, oh, wow, you're gross.
Right? And he's like, well, and you're short and fat. And she's like, I'm not, you're gross. And the portrait's probably more
Yeah.
accurate, but you just don't like the fact that I don't want to touch you. So,
Yeah, who knows, man? That I wish I could have been an early modern fly on the wall. Um,
right. But I mean, this is an important point about Henry VIII because so much modern assumptions about even the development of the Protestant Reformations. And so this is a good segue into that question of reformations and
yes.
even the place of women and churching and women's bodies in that Reformation movement. Because when Henry decides to sever his tie with Rome, it is because he wants to put aside Catherine, and the Pope does not want him to because the Pope does not want her brother or parents to be pissed off. And in fairness, her parents started the Spanish Inquisition. So I can understand the Pope having some reticence there. Also,
And he's the captive of her nephew,
yes,
Charles.
yes.
So like he wasn't going to do anything
No,
about it,
no, 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 no. Well, and she makes a very impassioned plea. I mean, Catherine of Aragon herself makes a very impassioned plea before Parliament to defend her marriage and to
Yeah.
defend the legitimacy of her marriage. And
Well, and I think what she does that's most interesting is when she appeals to Rome, she directly challenges the other thing Henry's after, which is absolute power in his kingdom, right? Because the whole argument he has is I should be able to do whatever I want regarding my marriage. It's a matter of state. I am the head of the church in England, which a lot of people might think is weird, but actually historically, the kings of England have often been at odds with the Pope over issues of national security and whatever.
Henry the Second, Henry the
I was
Second,
just going to say that.
Thomas
I
the
was
Second,
just going to, oh my
Henry the
gosh.
Eighth. Henry VIII manages to achieve the very thing that Henry II wanted to do in 1170 but
Yes.
could not do.
Yes,
And
precisely.
and it has been throughout that history. Henry II made the same argument that Henry VIII did about the need for
Yes.
the king to own the land of the Church of England and for the taxes of the churches in England to come to the royal coffers and not belong to Rome.
Yeah.
The only thing is that Henry II makes the terrible mistake of putting his best friend in as the Archbishop of Canterbury. And of course,
Running his mouth.
he becomes a priest the day before he becomes the Archbishop of Canterbury, which actually was not that unusual, but he
Right.
becomes a priest the day before, and then he does his job, which he warned
Yeah.
Henry he would do, and Henry's like, but you're my mate, and Thomas is like, but I said I was gonna do my job.
Yeah. Plus, he's going to get a lot more out of the Pope than he ever would out of Henry.
Yeah.
Like that's what a lot of people like. I don't want to say people aren't religious because I think we, again, make that modern assumption about
Yes.
what it means to look or be religious. These people were
Very.
probably religious. But yeah, his bread is buttered on a different side now, right? So the Pope and the Pope's interests are going to take center stage. But yeah, and I mean, you have kind of that same replay with Henry VIII and Cardinal Wolsey, right?
Yeah.
Because Cardinal Wolsey has that weird end of life sort of mini conversion, which I actually think was sincere. I do. And I don't have necessarily any evidence. I just have a very unscholarly gut feeling when I read
I
his
can see that.
letters.
I can see that. And
Yeah, it's just,
it's
I think he
interesting
sees everything
because
going off the rails and he's just like, oh shit, what have I
right.
done?
Well, and I
And
think it
yeah.
was he didn't I don't think he quite felt that Henry would go as far as he did.
Oh my God, yeah. No, and he was also very confident that he could just fix it. But then, of course, Charles invades and takes the Pope, and everything goes to hell. And Catherine appealing to Rome was a big problem. To come kind of back to what we were talking about, and I thought she is so smart. She is so damn smart. Because by appealing to Rome, she's saying, "You guys here can't give me a fair hearing. It's not possible." Also, she's basically saying you don't have the authority.
Right.
So kick it back to Rome. And then, of course, Cardinal Campeggio, who's the papal legate, he's like, my hands are tied. I can't, I have to go back to Rome now.
Yeah,
So,
because she has made a specific direct petition, and thus
yeah.
he has to do it. Now, I will interject one little thing about Cardinal Wolsey, and this is a very modern analog because Hampton Court Palace was Wolsey's, and Henry
Yes.
takes it, and makes it his.
Puts his name on it, puts his
And
aunt's name on it.
the college in Oxford was Wolsey College, and Henry takes it and calls it Christ Church. I mean, he didn't at least call it Henry College, but it's essentially
Trump
the
University,
same thing as you are my
Oxford.
political enemy. I'm taking your shit and putting in my name on it,
Yes.
and it's mine now.
You know, as much as I hate the whole like modern to history kind of teleology thing, I 100% am always thinking of Henry VIII when I look at Trump. 100%. I am like, he smells, he's disgusting, he's had 2 trillion wives,
And I
he's
also
fucked
believe
around
that
all of
they're
them.
both firmly in the final stages of tertiary stage neurosyphilis.
Yeah, for real.
Oh yeah.
Like Henry really goes off the rails after that head injury. Like he
The head
absolutely.
injury that was also accompanied by the thigh injury in
Yes, the
yes.
one that was always septic. Ugh. Yeah, so he smells like shit. Trump smells like shit. They both are somehow the
Corpulent
leaders of
and
countries.
narcissistic and violent and delusions of grandeur. I mean,
Mhm.
Henry had a lot of positive attributes earlier on. I'm not sure
He did.
I'm
He
not
did.
sure
And he was
Trump ever
hot.
did. I'm not sure Trump ever did. Trump is always
No,
easy.
no. But you know, I
But
think what's interesting. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
no, I was just gonna say, but the parallels, I think I can't help it.
Same.
Every time I see it, I
Yeah.
go
Even the
Henry
red
the
hair.
Eighth after that accident, but even just the sense that Henry had when Catherine makes her impassioned plea that he is willing to put aside a woman who has been his wife for 20 years,
Yeah.
has gone through
And a good
childbirth,
marriage.
a
They
good
had like a
marriage
happy marriage.
for years. I mean, they used to have wonderful pageants where he would dress up as Robin Hood with his men, and
Yeah.
they would kidnap the queen's ladies and take them into the forests and reenact King Arthur tableaus. I mean, this is
Yep.
the kind of stuff that Henry did before he lost the plot. And I actually think that the accident he has, because it's Anne Boleyn when he has the jousting accident, I think he was already starting to destabilize then. I think that may have been the beginning of perhaps
Yeah.
early dementia or perhaps, as I would argue, syphilis.
I mean, definitely it could be. I always, for my own self, I try not to do the whole, um,
Past diagnosis?
well, yeah, just because I think it, and I'm not saying you're wrong, and I'm not
No,
trying
I
to
know.
like run over you.
I have very little, shall we say, substantive physical evidence to prove this.
Well, nobody does, right? So, but I mean, like, I think it's
I mean, King
nowadays we like
Charles,
to
if he
have,
wants to provide a tissue sample of Henry VIII's corpse, it's at Windsor in St. George's Chapel, and
that's
it's there.
true.
He
Just
could just have
pick it up.
somebody do a little bit of an analysis to see if Henry had syphilis.
That'd be pretty amazing, actually.
It really would.
Um,
Actually, it'd be awesome.
but yeah, I mean, you hear these kinds of things when people talk about like the witch trials, and they're like, oh, they were all eating fungus on bread or whatever, which is absolutely ridiculous.
I disagree with the ergot theory. I really do.
Oh,
I really do.
100%. I mean, you would have to have ergot like all over the freaking world constantly. Well, not really. It wasn't really
Right.
all over the world, but you know what I mean. Like
I think it was
but
a
it's a
bunch of
way.
girls who got caught doing stuff they were not supposed to be doing, and their first reaction was to blame other people that they knew they could get away with blaming, and then other people saw an opportunity to relieve people of their property.
I mean, very, very possibly. Like that's the most fascinating thing about witch trials is we don't have any like, absolutely, this thing happened, then this thing happened. It's like so interesting. But these sort of like medical theories of the past, I think are interesting. And I don't think we should totally discount them, but I think it's more I think uh, it says more about us today, I think, than anything back in the past. Because today, that's what we do. We're like, okay, is there a physical reason this is happening? Is there a medical reason why I'm doing this or feeling that? Or, that tends to be
Or
where we
could
go
they
to.
just
I
be a
think
psychopath?
you could be. Or, I mean, think about it. Henry, he starts out life and he's not meant to be king,
Right.
you know?
That
So
whole
he's
Arthur
just
older brother thing.
right. So Arthur's being groomed to be king. Henry was always, pretty outgoing and whatever, but like I feel like, and again, I have no evidence, none whatsoever, but I feel like if you take a dude and you center the entire hopes of a nation and his family on them, and then further down the line, you say, oh, but you can actually have more power. You get like Thomas Cromwell in there. You could actually
Always a
have all these
Cromwell.
riches.
Always a Cromwell.
I have very strong feelings about power and what it does to people, and I don't think anyone is immune. I personally think anyone in a position of power is inherently corrupt. So, because I'm just horrible like that.
Or
But
corruptible. I mean, or there's always
I
because
think it's
there's always
inevitable
going to
that
be
it
a little
happens.
bit of that power that they enjoy. That there's always going
I
to
think
be
that
that aspect.
I think that if it's only the ability to be corrupted, then they will eventually remove themselves from power. But people that are in power and stay there, I believe it. I mean, I don't care if it's your university president, I don't care. All those people have sacrificed some moral courage to get where they are. And that comes back to Henry, right? Because his whole thing about, ditching his wife and whatever, he has grown up with this idea that he has to continue this dynasty. And along with that, not just the anxiety and whatever, is the power,
Right.
right? This is just my working theory based on literally nothing. So you look at somebody like Trump, he was born to all of that bullshit. So he was just crap from the beginning. He was just a garbage person. And also, I think like genuinely psychopathic. I used to actually think that psychopathy was not real. I used to think it was just what we said about people we didn't like to kind of medicalize them. And then, because I thought it's too easy, right? There's no way, there's no nuance. Because, I mean, if there's one thing about me, I'm not trying to be a contrarian all the time, but I'm always like, that doesn't sound nuanced enough. I no, the minute he got into office, I was like, Jesus Christ, he is an absolute psychopath.
I have a
It
sideline
exists.
in serial killers, so I'm very familiar with psychopathy.
Okay,
So
we should chat offline. Yeah, I have things. But yeah, like I mean, that just to me shows you how absolutely unhinged this man is.
yeah.
Is that I now fully believe in psychopathy.
Well, I mean,
I
this kind
don't.
of goes to Henry's desire for power and his need to control the church, because again, he
Yes,
succeeds where Henry II could not. And I
right.
mean, and Henry VIII was absolutely a student of history. He knew that
Yes,
history. He was well aware of the fact that the murder of Becket actually tanks, to a certain extent, any chances that Henry II has of attaining more of that power. And I will, in full
yeah.
disclosure, say that one of the four knights who murdered Thomas à Becket was one William de Tracy.
That's right.
I am related to one of the four knights who murdered Thomas in his own cathedral, instant saint, just add water. But because Henry achieves it, and he's not a Plantagenet. He has that
Right.
paranoia as well. So
Exactly.
add to
Exactly.
any kind of potential medical issue that he may or may not have had. He's got this complex, as you say, the dynasty's resting on his shoulders. He was the second son who was never meant to be king, but then his brother dies. He then takes his brother's widow. He has to use the book of Deuteronomy to marry her. And then they are married for 20
And then
years.
Leviticus to get rid of her.
And he uses Leviticus to get rid of her because he says, but I must be cursed by God because we didn't have a son who lived longer than 3 months.
So I actually think he really thought that. I might be in the minority.
Yeah.
I think he really thought that. It just also happened to be very convenient.
But I also think that
Henry
it shows that power aspect too, because God wouldn't normally care. But in Henry's case, God cares enough to curse you.
Right. That's
and
right.
This becomes that power dynamic that is embodied by his ability to take over the church, and where he succeeds, where Henry II, the first Plantagenet, did not.
Yeah.
And that feeds into it.
Yeah. And then we get the Reformations, which were already doing their thing on the continent.
Right. Now, you said that you said it's a myth about nailing the 95 theses on the door of Wittenberg Cathedral.
That's just
explain the reality of Martin Luther, who himself was a kind of off his head and very uptight, but go on.
He was very, very interesting. So Martin Luther was a very devout Catholic, devout Catholic. He was a monk.
Yes.
And he found himself troubled by questions of free will and things like that. Also theodicy, this idea of how do we get evil in the world if we have this amazing God? He was very much a thinker. And this was, to some, I guess, his downfall. So he kind of falls, he's a teacher at a university, right? That's what he's doing. And among the university circuit, back in the day, the cool thing was not lectures on medieval sex. It was lectures on boring points of theology. And he was one of these guys. And so he came into contact with a lot of different ideas. And so this kind of started the whole deconstruction process, I guess, for him. But yeah, uptight. Yeah. So I'm sure you heard the thing about his really hardcore constipation.
Actually, I have not heard that story.
So they allude to this in some of the movies. It was real. He had terrible, painful, awful constipation throughout his life. And he thought it was the devil's way of tormenting him. So this just tells you, not that he's crazy necessarily, but that he's a very sensitive guy and he's kind of doing this cause and effect thing. But anyway, so he starts, kind of having these ideas, and he actually writes to the Pope, and he's like, dude, the Bible says this, or, whatever, and we shouldn't be doing this and we should be doing that. And the Pope's like, yeah, cool. No. And so then Luther's impulse at first was, we should just change some things. I'm not trying to break away. And the thing about the Catholic Church is that up until this point, it had always managed to co-opt any kind of, for good or for ill, co-opt any kind of reform movement. So,
or stamp it out.
Right. And the reason they would stamp it out, the reason it couldn't be co-opted is because what was at issue was papal authority, essentially. Right. Because if you're Francis of Assisi and the Pope's like, okay, cool, but I'm a little uncomfortable with these aspects. Francis is like, yes, sir. Changes that, and then suddenly Franciscans are a thing.
But however, Frau Dulcin is not, and however, the Waldensians and the Albigensians are not. And it all depends on how willing they were to adapt to canonical Catholicism.
Exactly.
And whether or not that became a heretical movement or simply just Catholic light.
Right. The main point being one of papal authority, right? Because in the end, if you believe in papal authority, whatever else is going on in your head, you're like, sir, yes, sir.
Right.
So with the Waldensians and people like that, that had these kind of, I guess what we would call anti-clerical views, clearly the Pope is not the great big thing.
They don't care.
Yeah. And there's a whole history of the Pope basically doing a Henry VIII, where he's just like, no, I'm totally legitimate. I am the king of Christendom, right? So he's had to try to kind of shore this up, this idea that the Pope, Jesus just said, Peter, here you go. And then Pope, and everybody was following along. That's not a thing. So, you have all these insecurities going around. But anyhow, So Luther is unable to be appeased, right? He comes to a point where he's like, I'm not sure the Pope's authority is actually as great as, and that's not cool. So of course, that touches off everything. And at this time in the German states, there were loads of other people with fascinating ideas. He gets together with them. There's a whole community. And of course, they all have their little infighting and they break up and they get back together and they break up. And
Oh, you've got Jan Hus, the Hussites.
Right. Osiander,
you've got
Melanchthon.
Calvin
Yeah.
and Geneva, and of course, Wycliffe was 100 years before, but Wycliffe was, of course, that first English murmurings of the need for reform and writing scripture into English. And
I would say he wasn't the first, but I would say he's
no. You're right. Absolutely no. He's not the first.
Yeah, and mainly because I think what happens again is that, like, when I teach history of Christianity, I just tell people the entire history of Christianity, and I apologize to any Christian listeners, is just a history of trying to establish orthodoxy and failing over and over and over again.
And then having to repeat yourself because people are ignoring you.
If you look at things like Islam, Judaism, things like that, of course you see break-offs and different things, but any one of those people will look at you and be like, why are Christians always pissing on each other?
Right.
I mean, look at Constantinople. The entire Crusades, really, I mean, of course it was about Islam in some way.
Well, but of course it is the Fourth Crusade of the sack of Constantinople, where you have a bunch of Norman knights who sack Constantinople because they got bored waiting for the Venetian ships in Venice to take them to the Holy Land.
They were the wrong kind of Christians.
And they were the wrong kind of Christians, and they sack a Christian city, and they take all the Christian relics. That is how St. Louis gets the crown of thorns and the Holy Cross in Paris. Is because Christians sacked a Christian city. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So there were always people coming up with different, like, maybe we should not kill each other, or, whatever, and different kind of reform movements. But again, either they could be killed really quickly, stamped out in that way, or they could be co-opted. And with the Waldensians, I mean, there's a source that talks about these, the papal forces basically, and the French coming in and just destroying everybody, man, woman, and child. They literally go into church and do it.
Yeah.
Just indiscriminately slaughter. And one of the soldiers says, well, how do we know who to kill?
Because kill them all. God will sort them out later.
That's right.
That is Béziers. I did a study abroad on the castles of the Crusades, and I took students on the literature of the Crusades, and we covered the Waldensians, the Albigensians, and we went to Béziers. And of course, that's where they burned them in the church.
Yes. Yeah.
They burned them in the church, an actual Catholic church, the other Catholics. And it's like, how do you know?
So much violence,
and God will sort them out later. Yep.
Yeah. So I was talking to my class about a little bit of a side note, but I was talking about early modern religious disputes and how often people were just punching each other out in church. And they were so shocked. And I was like, I mean, the Medicis were like killing each other during the mass.
Well, I mean, in fairness, there are senators in the early American Congress who used to beat each other up.
Yes. Yeah.
With canes, and occasionally have a duel, and some people.
I mean, honestly, men are so fucking emotional. It's crazy.
It's hilarious because they're worried about a 60-year-old woman who might have her period and then blow things up. And it's like, first of all, that means
we have Trump.
60-year-old female physiology or anatomy, but that's fair. But when we'll go because it's true, they don't. Hi.
Oh God.
If a woman is 60, chances are she's menopausal.
It's all done with that.
Just saying. But with Martin Luther, he is not the
sorry, let me come back to that.
No, it's fine. This is what
this
is why I'm here. I'll bring you back to it.
Not the only show in town.
Yeah, with Martin Luther, he's not the only show in town. And
and he gets into plenty of disputes. There are lots of different interpretations of things going around. So it's not like he just invented the German Reformation, which, again, for people who are not familiar, they're really, even though the word German is used and Germany can sometimes be found, it's a whole bunch of different states. The German states is what I like to call it.
Yeah.
So, anyhow, so he does not just have this crisis of conscience overnight and show up in his monk robes and slam these points down onto a door. Um, he simply wrote down some things and circulated it among people,
And he was
sent
able
it to
to
the
print
Pope.
it. And he was able to print it, which is part of how it gains traction.
Oh, yeah, during this period, right. So things are being printed, and this is how ideas are getting transmitted so quickly and getting to England. And the thing about England is that England is far more influenced by Calvinist theology than Lutheran, although Anne Boleyn was very fond of what we might today call Lutheran theology. But really, it's Calvinism that takes a nice strong hold in England for the most part. Um, but again, people were very fluid. You know, if you told them you're going to this church, you're doing this thing, and then the next reign, they're actually now we're doing this. For the most part, people just wanted to kind of get along with their lives. But these things that we think of as great, big, scary theological disputes were mainly confined to a bunch of dudes shouting at each other through letters, you
Right.
know?
Well,
And that's not to say,
and in England, you have William Tyndale, who starts his translation of the Bible into
right.
English, and he goes back to the Hebrew and to the Latin. He doesn't have Aramaic. He doesn't. He has some Greek, but not enough to go all the way back to the Coptic. But he believes that the Catholic Bible had been mistranslated and misinterpreted.
Right.
And he's not wrong. I mean, Jerome had an agenda.
Yeah, the Vulgate is pretty fascinating.
But
Um,
so he translates it and retranslates it, and that's happening in England. He does the New Testament first. It comes out in 1525, and then he does the Old Testament because he does it backwards. And he gets it. He falls afoul of Henry,
yeah.
who rats him out to the Catholic authorities, and he ends up in Belgium. He ends up in what is now Belgium, in Leuven. The Catholic University has him. He's tried in Leuven, and ironically, he is executed the same year that Henry declares himself the head of the Church of England.
Yeah, the Protestants in England were funny because again, those insecurities, right? They start going, okay, we need to basically prove a lineage all the way back to the first Christians, which is really funny if anybody knows anything about early Christianity. It is not what you think it is. It's not even close, and there's not one.
Yes,
So,
if people
but
would like to know more about that, I am doing a great courses lecture series on
ooh,
medieval Christianities, plural.
oh,
That will
that's
be out
great.
in
I was thinking even
2028. Yeah.
earlier,
Yeah.
but I might have to hop on that medieval one. But yeah, I mean, even with the apostles and stuff, it's not what your pastor is telling you was. So anyway, but these guys are so anxious about it because the idea that they are an innovation instead of the real deal, just rescued from the evil, bad Jewish Catholic Church, which yes, Judaism and Catholicism get conflated. Catholicism is painted as foreign, not English. God is an Englishman, right?
Right.
So they're very concerned with kind of going back and sort of rescuing all this stuff. And I find that really fascinating. It's probably another thing I'll go back to in a couple of years, just because every so often it crops up and I'm like, one of my sidelines is just sort of how we remember what we remember and why we remember it the way we remember it.
Right.
And I would like to apply that to early modern people as well. Because
Because
of course, 19th century is when we get more of that biblical scholarship that shows kind of what's really what. But they didn't really do that at this time.
no.
So
Well, and the desire to create, I mean, even Tyndale himself is not necessarily really Protestant. He's just translating the
mhm,
Bible into
right,
English to have a more authoritative version.
exactly.
And it's not that he's trying to necessarily contravene Catholicism. It's just that the Catholic Church had suddenly decided about 1215, because it's always Fourth Lateran. Let's blame everything on
It's
Lateran.
always Fourth Lateran.
Always Fourth Lateran. That they couldn't translate the Bible into any vernaculars. There are plenty of vernacular scriptures before 1215. They're Old English vernacular scriptures. But once
Right.
the church says, don't do that, That's the doctrine. And Tyndale is not even necessarily trying to reform religion. He just thinks the Bible needs to
Right.
be accessible to everybody.
That is an extremely important point because people in Henry's church, they still called themselves Catholic. The Anglican Church today still calls itself Catholic. They don't see themselves as not Catholic. They see themselves as not under the authority of the Pope. Now, modern Anglicanism has taken all kinds of turns, and you can be high church, low church, in between church, whatever. But during this time period, none of those people would have said, or I shouldn't say none of those people, but most of the people would not have said they're not Catholic.
Right. Well, this is
So
where
people like Tyndale,
Episcopalian, the term means where the authority of the
bishops,
bishops.
right?
And as several of my Episcopalian friends like to say, it's Catholic light. It's like Miller Lite. Less
Yes.
guilt, more fulfilling.
Yeah. Yeah. So people like Tyndale were a dime a dozen in a sense. I mean, not in what he did and accomplished, but in terms of just kind of feeling like, okay, we don't have all these strictures on us in terms of scripture and whatever. So, although I will qualify that a bit. Henry VIII still he liked to pope it up a bit. Like he did say that gentlewomen could hear the Bible but not read it. So there were still restrictions on scripture and kind of who had
That's part of
access.
the reason he cuts off Anne Boleyn's head.
I mean, yeah.
Well, she read the Bible. She argued with him in theology. And there were a lot of reasons that he became displeased with her, but it didn't help that she would argue with him about religion in public.
I think Catherine Parr was the one that was more the offender on that scale. Because Catherine Parr was, oh God, she's my favorite. Well, Anna Cleves is my favorite, just because Anna Cleves is everybody's favorite, because of course she is. But Catherine Parr is my other favorite because she was so damn smart. But she was publishing, religious literature and things, and she really had to hold her tongue around the king. But there were times, and I'm sure you're aware of this, I'm really just speaking to people who are listening, where she would sort of dispute with Henry. He gets really pissed off about this, and he almost throws her in jail, right? She's so smart though. She's like, oh, I wasn't trying to one up you. I was trying to dispute with you so I could learn more, because we're supposed to learn from our husbands about theology. And he's like, oh, my love.
And by then his plot was really pretty. That's the end of his life.
He was pretty gone. But Catherine, she was absolutely brilliant, and she was a deeply religious evangelical. And that's another thing that I really want to go down the rabbit hole on, are these evangelical women like Catherine Willoughby and people like that, who formed these sort of almost societies of other evangelical women and the things they studied. Somebody wrote a book about it. I can't remember their name now, but I read it recently, and it was about sort of their networks in Cambridgeshire. And it was absolutely fascinating. I loved it so much.
I'm trying to remember. I think it was Catherine Willoughby. I used to teach when I was still teaching literature. I think it's Catherine Willoughby. These are early modern women. There were two. Lady Mary Roth was one. I would teach Lady Mary Roth, and I think Catherine Willoughby was. Did she die of smallpox?
I don't know.
And then that may not be the right Catherine. See, the problem is they're all bloody named Catherine.
But she was the.
But did she start the Society of Friendship for Women Writers? That may be a different.
I don't know.
Okay, I have to go back and look at my syllabus. But this is the thing: is that there are to kind of get back into that main point about that Reformation movement, is that no, it's fine. This is
I'm like over here and over there.
No, it's fine. This is
what you get for asking me a question.
Awesome. Well, because I know I want you to say what you want to say, and I'll just kind of get us back where we need to be, because when you think about all of these different movements of reform, especially something like Luther or even Tyndale or Huss or Calvin, there's often a sense that somehow they are so male-centered, they're so patriarchal, but they, like Christianity, early Christianity in the early Middle Ages, they couldn't take hold without women who ascribed to them.
Right. 1000%. And I think Luther's wife is an excellent example of that. So his wife, Catherine, former nun, she sort of was that first real example of the pastor's wife. And Luther had all these very homey sort of metaphors for different theological concepts. Like he talks about changing diapers and the glory of God, right? Um, so in some ways, he's kind of an ideal husband,
Right?
but so he's very involved with his family, and that comes out in his theology. But Catherine, she's running the brewery because they've got a brewery. She's running the household. He also had lots of students of his that would come and stay with him. That was kind of the model at the time. So
Sorry. I had to
no,
highlight
that's
that through
great.
line here.
I
But
mean, I love it.
I did not know that they had a brewery.
Oh yeah, yeah. Oh yeah. They had a brewery, and so that also made Luther quite the Protestant ideal sort of journeyman kind of, that whole Protestant
Everyman kind of ideal.
household.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, so
And
he
his
kind of had that model of good governance of my house, but like Catherine was running the show, and she spoke up. She wasn't, shy about things. But yeah, so, you could say that a lot of that sort of dinner table theology kind of stuff is really only possible because he has a wife who makes that possible. And also, she is the physical embodiment of some of that theology in that she was a nun who
right.
then left and married him. Um, so, yeah. And then, I mean, I'm always very interested in Cranmer's wives. So he was, Archbishop of Canterbury. He secretly married when he was in the German states, long before Henry was ever, because so clerical marriage was a funny thing because it took a very long time for it to really take hold. In the same way that it took a very long time to root it out way back in the day.
Those periods of time almost intersect where you're
Honestly,
like,
like I,
we're just finally getting into the actual celibacy thing, and yet then we have Protestants who are now not getting into the. You
yeah.
know what? I am sure that, and there were priests in the Middle Ages, even after Lateran IV, who maintained families. Who, I mean,
Oh
and
yeah,
in some
Wolsey.
places, and in some places, it wasn't even secret.
Oh no, I mean, and that's the thing is a lot of people need to understand is that it was out in the open for a lot of people. Like Thomas Wolsey, we're talking about Cardinal Wolsey. Well, I'm going to call her his common law wife, but Bess. They had a relationship for some like 20 years or something. And they had children, and they had, she started off as like a servant, and the way they do back in the day. She was his wife. I mean, let's just be honest, especially because back then marriage was not standardized, and who was married and in what way was still very contested. I'm going to call her his wife. But yeah, so Cranmer, he goes over because so he's a very dedicated Catholic, but
Until he
also very
wasn't.
until
Until he
he wasn't.
wasn't.
So I actually Cranmer's another one though where I believe he wavered, right? He's that example of power and corruption in the sense that he's like, oh no, I'm very devout and I'm very devoted to Catholicism and whatever. He goes to Germany, into the German states, and he meets Osiander, he meets all these guys, and he sees these guys with their wives, and he's like, oh, somehow he's convinced though, and he secretly marries Osiander's niece, actually.
Oh wow.
Um,
Okay.
so then he comes back, and then he's like, oh shit. Because Henry's still like, man, those married priests, they suck. So he's like, okay, I'm just not going to say anything.
Henry is still overseeing the torture of people like Anne Askew for being Protestants
Right.
at the urging, and again his henchman in that is Thomas Cromwell. So Anne Askew is executed, but she's tortured, and the narrative of torture, because it's
Yes.
Henry who introduces torture into English law, because it is not part of English
Right.
law before Henry. And when Anne Askew is tortured and executed as a heretic, Henry's already started his own version of the church. He's already declared
Yeah.
himself. So he's maintaining kind of this dual identity, both in
Yes.
I'm prosecuting, he would say, or persecuting people for being Protestant while also severing myself from Rome, while also having to, because that point,
Yes.
he dissolved the monasteries in 1536, I think it was.
Hmm.
It takes time. It's not immediate. I think it's finished in
Right.
38. But Anne Askew isn't executed until well after Henry had
Yeah.
already done all of
Well, and
them.
I think Anne Askew, well, first, I think Henry was interesting because, like I said, he was very conservative religiously, even after he took over the church. And then, but his takeover of the church kind of caused some people to go, cool, maybe we can go further. People like Thomas Cranmer, who's like, cool, maybe I can get some now.
Maybe I
But
can be open about my marriage.
that's right, that's right. But Anne Askew is fascinating to me because her main crimes, as I see it, um, she's really speaking. First of all, she's a woman who's married, but she's not with her husband. And that causes a lot of consternation. And Henry's constantly like, get your woman in order,
And she
right?
reads. She's also, most of her interrogation is about the books that she reads and reading John Bale
Yes.
and her
Yes.
and having and hiding John Bale's memoirs.
Yeah, so reading and books, that was a major part of deciding who was a heretic, right? So Henry wanted certain things, and he wanted to kind of stop at those things. um, so he didn't want a whole lot of like dissent happening, which is, of course, you open the floodgates, you get the flood, you
Right.
know?
Yeah.
So, but he didn't like this. So yeah, he just was like, no, we're just getting rid of the Pope, and then, maybe a couple other things I don't like. Yeah, Anne Askew, she's a woman who's married. She's also a woman who's speaking publicly, which was often equated with sexual immorality. Not that they would necessarily think she was sexually immoral, but that was sort of the connotation, right? There was perhaps a gender situation as well. But you have like Robert Barnes also executed for a lot of the same stuff and for being a
Yeah.
big mouth. And, and people did notice how they had to sort of, walk a
Navigate
very
it.
fine line.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and of
Um,
course, when you end up with this goes back to our original point about the whiplash of people in the
yes.
16th century, because when Henry dies in 1548 and his son takes over, and of course, his son is young and very Protestant, very, very evangelical. He is a devout because his mother was Henry's favorite wife, James Seymour, who did the
Hmm.
courtesy of dying 12 days after giving birth to a boy, which is why Henry said it was his favorite wife. Um,
Yeah, he didn't have to get to know her.
well, and also it's like, she had the good grace to die, but he did. He
Yeah.
always said Jane Seymour was his favorite wife, and it's like you all were married for about a year because she got pregnant
You know,
almost immediately,
that's why she was the favorite, right?
right?
She actually almost got as well. He was deeply unhappy with her response to the Pilgrimage of Grace. So the Pilgrimage of Grace, for anyone who doesn't know, basically when Henry broke with Rome, a lot of people in the North that were very, very fiercely Catholic did not love this. And their whole idea was that they were going to gather an army and march on London, not to kill the king or whatever, but to like, I don't know, persuade him to like be Catholic again. That's the very general, very, very flawed explanation. But Jane came from a very devout Catholic family. She was not pleased with the disillusion. She was not pleased with the Pilgrimage of Grace. And I guess a couple times she maybe said something, or in some way, Henry got wind of the fact that she was not awesome about it. And he basically told her, like, you need to get with the program because, like, I killed my last wife. I mean, he probably didn't say that, but I'm going to pretend he said that because that just sounds awesome.
Well,
Like,
I
that
mean,
sounds like a really
you can
good
believe
show.
he said it because he marries Jane Seymour 24 hours after Anne's head hits the
Yes,
straw. I mean, and that's
literally.
not hyperbole. Anne's head hits
Yes,
the
literally.
straw and they get married 24 hours later.
Yep.
I mean, this is a
Yep. The
guy who's
very
just
next
such a
day.
massive douchebag that when Catherine of Aragon dies, he and Anne Boleyn wear canary yellow silk
Yeah.
to court, and then he won't even pay for Catherine's funeral at Ely Cathedral. In fact, no, sorry, Peterborough Cathedral, because the cathedral at
Yeah.
Peterborough, they actually bury her and they create the monument to her because Henry won't pay to have his wife of 20 years buried. I
That's
mean, it's
right.
one thing when he won't pay for the coffin for Anne Boleyn, who he had executed, and she's buried
Yeah.
in an
She was in an
arrow
arrow
box.
box.
Yes, with her
Well,
head
this is what
probably at her
happens.
feet.
You
But
deny his authority.
And
You're
that's
not loyal enough.
well, and so I'm sure Jane Seymour probably went, Henry, I'm pregnant. It was like, all
Right?
right, it's fine. We'll just hold off beheading
And
you now.
I'm not even sure how serious of an infraction it was. It was just that he definitely noticed, like, because she had, I mean, it was always the place of the queen to plead for the rebels, right? That's
Always.
always, it was almost like a ritualized show, like, oh, please spare them. Oh.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
she was
yeah.
a little too impassioned, I think, is what it
Right.
was. And everybody knew. I mean, the Seymours were pretty Catholic. And then you get, of course, to her uncles who, or I'm sorry, the king's King Edward the Sixth. So Henry's son, his
Yes.
uncles become like one of them is Lord Protector of the
Right.
realm because King's too young.
Guilford Dudley is the one who marries Lady Jane. And
Yeah.
then, of course, Robert Dudley is the younger son who's Earl of Leicester. And of course,
Yeah.
Robert Dudley, Earl of Leicester, is the one who is the favorite and lover of, because there's just no two ways around it, Queen Elizabeth I. And in fact, Robert Dudley and Elizabeth were they were close cohorts because he was branded a traitor. His father was branded a
Yes.
traitor because they supported Lady Jane's 9-day bid for the throne, but that was because, of course, the father wanted his son to be
Yes.
king and all
Poor
of
Lady
that.
Jane. Oh
Right, poor Lady
man.
Jane. That was so not her fault.
She seems like she was so cool, like from like an intellectual standpoint. Like she was a nerd. I would have loved to have seen that. But yeah, so Edward, his uncles are kind of overseeing
right.
everything. And
But
at
and he is
least
and Edward is genuinely evangelical because, of course, that is
because of
how he was
Somerset.
raised.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Lord Somerset, his uncle. Yes. It's, yeah.
And
So, I mean, there does have a change, and there is a change in the family, and you see that a lot. Just like when we talk about the American Civil War, where I'm from, and it's like brother against brother. And it's like you did have sometimes religious mixing, in these families. So Edward, I think Edward wasn't as much like a Puritan as everybody kind of makes him out to be, but I think that he really emboldened Puritan elements.
I imagine so because he
Um,
was also so very young. I mean,
yes, exactly.
I think he's only 16 when he
When he
dies.
dies, yeah.
I mean, he's king for 5 years. What one could almost say 5 minutes. He's king from 1548 until 1553, and then he dies, and then Mary is
Mary.
queen from 1553 to 1558, and then Elizabeth from 1558 to 1603. And in that space of time, from Henry's death to Edward's death to Mary becoming queen and revising the country back to hardcore Catholicism. And of course, in 1555, she burns Cranmer, Ridley, and Latimer in
Yeah,
Oxford. And those were the Catholic bishops who'd converted to not Catholic and then refused to convert back. It's because they refused to convert back,
right.
probably because Cranmer has that wife.
Well, and like I think with Mary, I would argue Mary didn't really reinstitute hardcore Catholicism. She didn't take it as far as she could have. And I think it's because she was smart enough to know that there were enough very committed Church of England people happening now that she couldn't get that full conversion. But what she could do was, prosecute traitors. And that's a fine line. Or, it's easy to sort of see a traitor in a non-co-religionist.
Well,
But she also,
she has 300 people burned at the stake.
yes, her and Elizabeth both really went to town on the stake.
Though
So I think
I don't remember the actual numbers for Elizabeth.
I think Elizabeth actually might have burned more.
Well, she was also queen for a lot longer.
Yeah, that's true. She had more time to burn.
There's 45 years. She was queen for 45 years.
um,
And
but yeah, I mean, like
Elizabeth
Mary.
Elizabeth allowed the use of torture. I mean, torture was most
Mhm.
definitely part of the
Oh
Elizabethan
yeah, once
political
Henry started doing it, that was it. It was out of the bag. It was
yeah.
there. And I mean, people thought when your souls are at stake, right? This is this big business. It's not just, treason or not just treason, but you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
religious matters. This is a high stake for them. But it's really interesting because, during Mary's time, you have some Protestants that go abroad, like the Knollys family, people like that, where they're like, cool, we're going to go to Geneva and we're just going to chill there for a bit. And they end up coming back, of course, with Elizabeth. But so I think a lot of the major figures, other than, of course, the ones you mentioned, can avoid maybe the worst of it. But yeah, lots of people did get killed. A lot of people did get imprisoned. But I just think that, like, in terms of how far she could have taken it, like really instituted Catholicism in the same exact way pre-Henry.
Right.
She didn't end up doing that. It was almost more like her father's church in a way. I mean, obviously the Pope was still there, but and I think that was just the only way she could have done it.
Well,
Honestly, she probably wanted to bring it back fully, but
right. And I think part of what makes Mary unpopular, because she was very popular at first. I mean, she's welcomed
mhm,
back
yeah.
into London. That is
Well, because the
actually
succession is the succession, man.
exactly. And that's why Lady Jane's 9 days is because Mary is welcomed into the city and is like,
Yes.
hi, yes, I am Henry's daughter. And they're like, yes, you are.
Right.
What really starts to make her less popular is her marriage to Philip.
Yes. Marriage to that Catholic foreigner.
Well, also
Um,
again, because of that Spanish lineage, that Catholic foreigner,
yep.
and that the fact that Philip also didn't shut up about taking over England, and the English are like, hey, I don't think
Oh,
so.
and then when he didn't get his way, he's like, okay, I'm just not going to come back here anymore.
Right? I mean, because Philip also tried when Mary dies, and of course there are all kinds of speculation about whether she died of cancer, if she had a uterine tumor, if she
Right.
thought she was pregnant. But of course that would
Yeah, she had
require,
lots of issues. Yeah,
but she the expectation that she was going to have to produce an heir, but her husband's in Spain. I mean,
yeah. And there's so much fear about having a queen for exactly that reason, because a queen is still a woman and a woman is still subject to her husband. So, when people talk about, well, why couldn't Henry just, have his children succeed, or his female children succeed him? Well, they did. It just wasn't his ideal, because the idea is that you get someone like Philip in here, and he can take over in certain ways. And I think this informs a lot of Elizabeth's decision to not marry. She doesn't want to share that power,
and that goes back
and
to
be
what you said
subject
about
to a man.
power. That goes back to what you said
Right.
about having that power, because
Yeah.
as altruistic as Elizabeth seems to us in some ways, I mean, again, she was more than willing to use torture. She was more than
Oh, yeah.
willing to execute people. I mean, that
It's
is,
mercurial.
yeah.
She was a bit mercurial, but she was her father's daughter. So yeah, that is a very fascinating, interesting, messed up period of time. But you go from Edward, from that Protestantism, you go back to Catholicism, at least in some form, and then you end up with Elizabeth. And Elizabeth is where she's smart. She's like, all right, we need to sort of even this out, which looks differently. Even out means something different back in the day. Toleration is not what it is today. But she kind of institutes a little bit of what's called the via media, the middle way. They're Anglican theologians who are pushing this idea as well. I think that contributes to at least a bit more stability after all of those years. But the Reformation doesn't end, right? Because you always have that element of these people who are like, well, it didn't go far enough, or it went too far, and they're still battling it out. I mean, you have all the
Puritans.
way.
I mean, and that's the thing about the Puritans, is because, of course, you start to see Puritanism in England during Elizabeth's reign. I mean, this is
Even
it's
before that, I would say.
yeah, I look at that, and you would know. But
Maybe.
absolutely. But I mean, I say Elizabeth's reign because, of course, my first introduction to it is Malvolio in Twelfth Night. That there's everything
I was
just
totally thinking of him as
yeah,
well.
is this
The
Malvolio
yellow
with
stockings.
his cross-gartered yellow tights. Because they are, I mean, Shakespeare is taking the piss out of
Oh,
Puritans.
yeah.
I mean, he is totally
Yeah.
taking the piss out of Puritans. And so when the Puritans get their knickers in a wad and come here, thank lucky us, in 1620, because they're like, we're persecuted. It's like, yes and no, you're not really as
I
persecuted.
had that same conversation with people. Yeah, because I'm like, they were, but they also weren't. Like, they didn't have to be as many people.
No. And in some ways, they kind of made themselves persecuted. They kind of just said, please persecute.
They wanted it.
They wanted it because they wanted to be able to claim martyrdom that they just couldn't.
They were wearing theological short skirts.
You know, and with the Puritans who come over and settle Plymouth, that need to create a persecution narrative is what gets them so deeply embedded in that foundation narrative, which is where we get all the people now who want to say, well, we are a country founded on the ideals of God. No, we are not. Most of the founding fathers were not Christian. They were deists, and they did not actually embed Christianity into the Constitution or into the Declaration. God, sure, but their version of it. The Puritans had no say in any of that. The Puritans show up, they land, they nearly die. And by the way, Jamestown was 13 years before. I say this is a Virginian.
Yes.
I say this is a Virginian. Jamestown was 13 years before.
That's right.
And that was an economic endeavor.
That was a trade colony.
Yeah, it was a trade colony, and initially brought free African people with them until 1619, when the first enslaved Africans come over. But the Puritan idea of themselves as the chosen one, persecuted, who had to flee, that narrative is kind of what takes hold. And of course, that's part of why the witch trials happen in 1692, is because they've got a really jumped up idea of themselves.
It's interesting. I mean, and also thinking about the colonies themselves, because they're all different religiously, you know, you have Catholic colonies, you have Protestant colonies, Virginia is pretty middle of the road for the most part. It's your standard, your bog standard, like
Episcopalian
Anglicanism, which eventually becomes Episcopalianism. And
Maryland,
then up north,
Maryland is Catholic colony.
And then you've got
the Huguenots. The Huguenots are in South Carolina. I mean, the Huguenots come to South Carolina.
Yeah. So there's so much going on there. So it is kind of interesting how they all come together at a certain point. But I think we sort of look at this sort of individualistic thing as our heritage from, the Puritans and, our rebellion and all of that.
That fleeing persecution becomes part of that American exceptionalism narrative.
Yes. Which everyone's just jealous of us.
Right. And we're so extraordinary because we overcame so much to found this country. And that, of course, brings me to kind of my final question in this wonderful discussion. Because we could probably go for hours.
Sorry about that.
Oh, don't apologize.
That's literally how I roll.
Oh, no. It is. There is
figuratively how I roll.
No reason at all for any apology, because I'm right there with you. I mean, we will do this again. We'll do this again just for shits and giggles. But
fun. We don't have to just have what's before us. We can have imagination. We know that it hasn't always been this way. I think about that a lot with capitalism, because capitalism fucking sucks. And we just assume it has to be that way. It's a given. It's just there. It's always there. It's not always there. It's not always been there, you know? So to have that imagination, I feel like we need to be able to think historically, and see how different people of all different times have confronted various different issues. So that's I guess primarily what I'd want people to take from it. And also just early modern history is just rad. It's super rad. So read it, study it, talk about it.
Absolutely. Well, and Autumn, I want to thank you so much for such an absolutely amazing and wonderful conversation.
Thank you.
I am Dr. Larissa Tracy, and this is Medieval Mischief and Mayhem.